Welcome to Retailistic, the official podcast of Coresight Research for June 24th, 2025. This week, our CEO, Deborah Weinswig, has two guests, Samantha Howard and Ellie Williams from Rhythm. Sam is the head of merchandising with over a decade of experience with leading retailers such as Nordstrom and Urban Outfitters. Ellie is the senior vice president of product, bringing over 15 years of experience driving product strategy, innovation, and revenue growth across e-commerce, advertising, and health tech. But before we join Deborah for this insightful discussion, let's bring in Georgina Smith, the head of editorial at Coresight Research, to highlight some of the research publishing this week on Coresight.com. Hi, Georgina.
Hi, Philip. Firstly, the Coresight Research team has been busy in recent weeks preparing for our exciting Next Gen 2025 conference, which took place on June 23rd. The event brought together a curated mix of leaders and innovators to dive into the shifts reshaping how we build, operate, and connect. We heard bold ideas and transformative strategies that are reshaping the future of retail, real estate, and the consumer experience, with a focus on artificial intelligence. Thank you to our sponsors, IBM, Intel, and Simulate AI, and to our incredible speakers and everyone who joined us at NextGen for making it such an insightful conference. Our premium subscribers can look forward to new reports this week that present essential takeaways from the keynotes, conversations, and panels. Reflect on what you learned or catch up on what you missed with Coresight Research. Keeping our minds on AI, we've just published a deep dive on its use cases and value in the beauty industry. We believe that the convergence of beauty technology, including AI and advanced data capabilities, is reshaping product innovation, manufacturing, marketing strategies, and loyalty building. Check out the report to explore the applications and benefits of AI across the beauty retail value chain, from innovation to personalization. Also in sector-focused research, we will discuss major market trends and themes disrupting the US apparel and footwear market, spanning AI-powered agility, the rise of resale, a growing focus on nearshoring, and more. Discover the consumer behaviors that are prompting strategic pivots across the industry, including the use of GLP weight loss drugs. In seasonal research, we will analyse proprietary US consumer survey findings to understand how the US back-to-school shopping season is likely to play out. Our three-part back-to-school series focuses on how and where consumers will shop, as well as what they will buy. Following on from recent reports on the potential impacts of tariffs on the end-of-year holiday season in the US, we will distill our key insights into an early outlook for the holidays, which we will continue to revisit as the second half of the year unfolds, to bring you the latest projections. You can also turn to our monthly US Retail Sales Outlook series to understand the likely effects of 14 key macroeconomic indicators on retail sales, from unemployment to consumer sentiment to home prices. The latest report, with updated sales projections, will publish this week. As always, I'd like to remind listeners to stay tuned to our regular weekly reports on store openings and closures and consumer sentiment and shopping behaviour. Keep up to date with retail-related developments as they unfold to get a step ahead in understanding industry and consumer shifts.
Thanks, Georgina. Now let's bring in Deborah, Sam, and Ellie.
I'm very excited to have you joining our Retailistic podcast today. Thank you so much. And so we've got two amazing guests. I'd love for each of them to introduce themselves. So first we'll kick it over to Sam. Sam, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm Sam Howard from Rhythm Corporation, where I lead our merchandising team. I've been with the team for about 2 years, but prior to joining Rhythm, I have been a merchant my whole life. So I started my career at Urban Outfitters, and most recently, prior to joining Rhythm, I was at Nordstrom. And in those years prior to Rhythm, I've just held a ton of buying and planning roles and everything in between.
Fantastic. Can you tell us what it means to do merchandising for Rhythm?
Yes, that's a great question because it is a little funny. So my team works with our retail partners, and we work directly with the merchants at some of the largest retailers in the country, and we help them expand their 3P and 1P dropship programs. We help them add net new suppliers, net new SKUs, and we really just help them, profitably expand that program by, leveraging the data that we have access to, because we work with some of the best and biggest retailers in the US and really across the world. So it's a really great program. I think, having been at different retailers that worked with Rhythm, it's not actually a program that I knew a ton about before joining myself. And it's something that's growing, and I'm really thrilled to be a part of.
Thank you for sharing. We appreciate it. And it's really interesting. It sounds like a great role. Ellie, tell us a little bit about yourself and when did you come to Rhythm and what did you do before?
Hi, Deborah. Thanks for having us. I'm currently on the road. So I joined Rhythm in October, November of 2021 as a product leader. So I worked at a few other companies in product before this, but previous to that, I was actually a startup founder and acted as a retailer. So I had a online personal styling company similar to Stitch Fix. So I'm very familiar with the buying cycles and would actually hired buyers like Sam to purchase inventory for the company.
Well, thanks. It's interesting. We hosted a dinner about 2 weeks ago, and knowing this was coming up, right? Like I probably asked different questions or listened in a different way. And if we think about merchandising, at least what came up at this dinner was that the greatest challenge is around fit. And, kind of once you pulled on that string, no pun intended, right? Like people really opened up about some of the challenges they face in the organization, whether it's around geography or, any one of a number of challenges. The report that we published together on March 31st, which, has a lot of amazing data and is called Unlocking Success, the Pathway to Profitability for U.S. Brands and Retailers. And so in that report, we did a lot of data gathering and insights that really apply to Rhythm and their customers. What I thought, some of the numbers I pulled out that I thought were really interesting was that 80% of folks cited a lack of insights to inform best fit and profitable channels as among the top 5 challenges. And so it's funny, I was thinking about this whole idea around like physical fit and then technological fit. Ellie, how do you think about kind of fit, right, between technology and product? And how do you see those kind of, with your background, come in and out of the conversation, maybe differently or similarly than you would have expected?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I think of our company, I think of us as being so we not only do we have a marketplace product for retail operators to launch their own marketplace, but we are a marketplace to ourselves. So in that we have one really neat thing about Rhythm is that we have both the retailer infrastructure as well as the supplier infrastructure, which puts us, when you have all of that data about both sets, puts us in a very unique position to be able to matchmake. So on top of providing the technological tools to facilitate the logistics of third-party purchases, we also are a matchmaker. And today, Sam and her team do most of that matchmaking. And we've built some internal tools to sort of superpower them. But on our roadmap, actually, is to double down on that investment and allow really, increase the density of our connections on our network by using this unique data set that we have to make perfect matches for people and de-risk the chances of, because 3P is inherently less risky than first P, but to just increase the chances of success rather through the data that we have.
That's really interesting. I mean, Sam, as you think about this idea of matching, can you tell us kind of what that involves and, what are some of the challenges around that?
So when we're working with a retail client, there's a lot of things that we talk to them about when we're thinking about, the best ways to expand their assortment. Generally, we focus largely on a category opportunity as kind of our primary kind of focused in the beginning. What categories are trending for that retailer? What categories are we seeing trending in kind of their comp group across the network? Where are they overperforming in terms of their comp group by a category set? Where are they underperforming? Where do they have white space opportunity? And from there, I think, where we're poking at kind of that white space opportunity, what we're looking at is kind of a supplier set that we have a lot of data access to. So then we can kind of like rank the suppliers, and we're looking at kind of how they're performing across the network. So we have really good visibility to seeing who's transacting a lot, who's doing a lot of volume, how are they performing in terms of kind of return sets. We have access to just a lot of performance data to kind of help get them that really good match. As Ellie kind of mentioned, I think when you're a merchant and you're trying to create the best assortment and best selection for your customers, just having been there myself so many times, you know what your customer loves, you have a great idea, kind of the things that they're shopping for, you know who this person is, and you're going to market, you're picking suppliers that you think are going to best fit that customer. But it really kind of ends there. You're kind of hoping and wishing after that point. You're picking the best product, the best selection that you can. And that's all you really know at that point. But we can kind of take it a step further, knowing a little bit more about the performance metrics with each of these suppliers and really creating that leverage to kind of help make the best matches that we can.
I was just going to chime in that, not only on the supplier's performance, but on the profitability of the actual SKUs as well. So one thing we often hear from some of our bigger retailers is, I was interested in that product, but I don't know if it's in dropship, at least they're still responsible for shipping costs, right? So we're able to, because we have delivery products as well, we're able to say, okay, based on historical data, this is how much it costs to ship this item from zone 1 to, this customer and wherever in the US. And that's a really key factor into the merchant's decision. So a lot of people like to think that merchants are these tastemakers, which they are. And Sam has unbelievable taste. I've been to her house. But completely data obsessed. Like their job is so dependent on reading the data and following it. So I almost feel like that's a bigger factor into a lot of the decisions that they make. And so both profitability, performance, they're looking at a lot of things. And we are in a very unique position to help them assess both profitability. They generally know what their customers want. But then, is that supplier going to get the item picked, packed, and shipped to their SLAs, to their standards, uphold their brand.
I really like how you put that. It's interesting. I will say, we've hosted a dinner with you guys, and I've never seen, retailers and brands follow a CEO as much as with Rhythm, because I think that the way that you guys approach the challenges and organizationally, so back to the report that we worked on together, right? So on average, 60% of retailers are challenged in driving profitability kind of across business functions. And then getting back to this idea around product assortment, that 53% are currently experiencing challenges, which I have to be honest, I wouldn't have thought it would have been over 50%. That was one of the numbers in the whole report that stood out to me. But this was even more interesting, is that the challenge has increased over the past years to about 61%. And it goes back to this prior question I had around kind of fit, but like fit meaning two different things, is that what we're seeing is that as consumer shapes and sizes have changed with some of just for many, many reasons recently, that this product assortment has become more challenging. And so as we think about Rhythm and where it falls into the hierarchy of how retailers and brands think about solving problems, Sam, does it differ between retailers and brands, or how does the Rhythm, if you will, kind of ecosystem, how do retailers and brands look at it differently?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is there's seldom a differentiation in some cases between a retailer and a brand anymore, because I think, so many brands are really leaning into DTC expansion and creating that connection with the customer. That's such a big primary focus for them. The more I think about it and the more we talk to some of these brands, it's hard to differentiate the two anymore. And that was kind of always the case when you think about somebody maybe like a Nike or somebody big like that. But even the more I think about some of these smaller brands, that's just becoming the case for almost all of them now. So it's really becoming a situation where it's almost difficult to differentiate like what is a retailer and what is a brand anymore, because most brands are retailers in and of themselves. So many of the problems that retailers are trying to solve, a lot of brands are trying to solve. I think one of the biggest things that everyone's trying to focus on is that kind of multi-connection point of how can we get our product to the right people in the right places, where is the right distribution points. But I do think that melding of the surgence of DTC within brands has really muddied that problem set.
It's really interesting, because I think that in some ways they're both learning from each other. And we have seen this kind of physicality, if you will, especially with Gen Z and how they do touch physical at least at some point in their buying experience. And what we're seeing, right, is that retailers are trying to stay closer to the consumer in ways that they hadn't kind of before. Ellie, how are you seeing this play out, and how is that changing kind of just how you think about the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing that we did notice, especially during the pandemic when there wasn't a ton of store traffic, was a lot of retailers rethinking, how do I use my physical space? Now that's kind of, there's been some drastic decisions that have been made with a couple of retailers who have, have closed a lot of locations. But even for the remaining ones, I think they're starting to rethink, how do we think about our physical space? And the way what seems kind of sort of obvious to me is where it's heading is showrooming, where I think Nordstrom does a good job of this, especially with their Nordstrom local locations, where they'll have, if it's apparel, they'll have 3 sets or, like a case pack of whatever the garment is. And you go there and you can try it on, but you don't necessarily leave with it there. You then order it online and it gets sent to you from someplace else. Apparel's an interesting one, but I'd say it makes, with appliances and stuff, it's much more common. That's kind of how I see the future is physical locations becoming more of showrooms and experiences. I think that's another big one, right? They got to create. I always think back to in San Francisco, we had these experiences. What was it? Oh, Museum of Ice Cream. And then there was like another one, like called the Museum of Color or something. It was like, is this a thing now? But to me, I was like, oh, retail should use this and create these type of experiences because it's great. Like it's just this circular marketing thing that takes on its own life, right? I think that that's a great thing that retailers should look at to do with their physical store locations.
And that completely plays into retail media, right? I mean, that's in community. So to me, I couldn't agree with you more, right? This idea that the physical provides kind of like a space for the community, and retail media, both on-prem and on platform and off, this idea that you can start to get closer to the consumer in a way that you couldn't before, but you're also improving their experience. And I think, I don't know, Sam, how you look at it, but I think you're like this idea of like a fuller experience or more meaningful, or the brand or the retailer starts to kind of play a different role as you think about, kind of your shopping journey.
Yeah. I think that especially for younger generations, I think that people really want brands and retailers to play into their value sets. I think they want, an experience, a community. I think I really resonated when you said community. I think they want to participate with brands and retailers that really reflect the value set that they have. And I think the more that brands and retailers can kind of reflect values that they have and make sure that they're, portraying that in events that they hold and partnerships that they have, I think that that's going to be so valuable in getting that younger generation to kind of participate and interact with them. That makes, that just feels so authentic. I think that authenticity is just so valuable.
Yeah, I have looked at retail media. It's interesting at the beginning. I think it the way that it's evolved, and also too, it's become much more personalized as opposed to kind of, peanut butterized. And this idea that it's much more, personalization, customization or whatnot. And I think that it also elevates what consumers expect in many cases. Ellie, how do you think the consumer is not only kind of changing how they shop, but how does retail media play into that experience?
So I think that retail media makes a lot of sense with marketplaces. Especially with brands wanting to elevate their, positioning on a retailer's site. I'm very fascinated right now in the space of retail media. Traditionally, till about, a year ago, was all about search engine marketing for brands, right? And now it's shifting to what we're calling generative. Yeah, GEO. And I'm interested to see how that actually impacts at least the online retail media aspect. I still think that brands and retailers have a huge opportunity for the in-store, like showrooming, creating experiences that go viral. That I sort of look at that separately as its own bucket. And then the other bucket is the online space. And I'm curious to see how that actually impacts retail media overall. I imagine it's going to have like some impact on it, but I do think that there's still opportunity there. And the reason I say that is because I think the generative searches it's a different point in the user's experience, right? When you go to a site to explore more, you're usually in like more of a discovery phase. So you might not even know exactly what you're looking for versus if you type into a ChatGPT or Perplexity or Grok or whatever, find me these running shoes for under $150. Like you have a much more focused intent. But I do think that will impact some of the rev share or wallet share that goes to retail media today. I don't see a way that it can't, right? So I think that landscape is shifting very quickly. We do play in the retail media space today. Today, we're really focused on creating that one-stop shop for suppliers to be able to, syndicate their listings to all whatever channels they want, receive orders, fulfill orders, help them optimize across channels and optimize their catalog, but then also advertise. So we provide all of that. And we're looking into now what can we do in the generative search space as well.
I have to tell you, you just like kind of fed into everything that I've believed, that sometimes you're like, okay, am I off and on? First of all, I can't believe we have well over like 225 retail media networks, because I have to say, I thought to be able to count them on like one hand. Because I always believed that you would have it at the marketplace level as opposed to the individual retailer level. And so that to me has been absolutely fascinating. Secondly, the SEO versus GEO, that also, right? I mean, I will say we've seen it at Coresight ourselves. How people discover us, honestly, they're discovering us a lot more now from a GEO side versus SEO side. And it's just, and they feel like when they show up, right, they've already done it's a completely different journey, right? They've done all the work to get there. And so I think, Sam, right, as consumers, right, kind of continue to evolve and expect different things, is not necessarily, it's just different things out of their shopping experience. How can retailers use marketplace strategies and more flexible inventory and 3P selling? Like, how can they use these models to experiment and adapt to this kind of evolving consumer? And what does it take for them to be able to do that?
I think the additional models of inventory have always been so good in just allowing you to create kind of that endless aisle experience. I think dropship was just kind of the gateway to allowing a buyer, it's just so funny living through the evolution of all of this. It's just happened so quickly when I think about it. And I'm really, I'm not that old. I haven't been doing this that long, but, just living through the evolution of all this stuff, just having been a buyer since, I can remember when we merged store and online buying. Because that was just like a really foreign concept.
Some still have not. Let's just say some still.
That's true. Some still have not. That was like when I started, that was like a crazy thing to do. That was just, it was, or the online buying office was still like a fledgling operation. The evolutions of all of these things have just been so great to be able to give customers more options. I think, kind of this evolution from being able to add dropship to then being able to now experiment with marketplace. I think it just gives retailers more opportunity to experiment and add more brands, add things that maybe didn't make sense for them, obviously from like a profitability perspective. In my experience, retailers just haven't been taking advantage of those models in their full effect. So I think even in dropship, just in my experience, like we hadn't, any retailer I've been at, we hadn't really taken advantage of how much we could really put on dropship. I think there's always, a back and forth of like how much selection is too much selection. But I think I'd argue that when you already have, when you can already prove that people don't really browse past page 3 of dresses and you have 65 pages of dresses, then what's really the difference of having more than that? It really becomes about filtering at that point. So really then it just becomes about making sure that you have the right product for the customer. So I think it really it gives retailers the flexibility to add different categories, add different things that, maybe didn't make sense again from a profitability perspective, things, that maybe just didn't make sense for them to try before. I think what's going to be really interesting is how they think about these things from a holistic perspective. We work with a lot of retailers right now who everything's like a little disjointed, and I understand why. But sometimes there's different teams doing drop ship, there's different teams doing marketplace. It's almost, kind of competitive from like certain standpoints. It's like who's owning what's expanding, what's not expanding. So I think there's something to be said about maybe the holistic vision for what that looks like. But I think the biggest thing I'd say is that there's just so much opportunity to take advantage of really blowing all of these models up and really seeing what's out there.
No, that's an excellent point. And Ellie, I mean, I have also spent, kind of a long time in retail, and I remember at first I was so surprised that most folks just took the prior year number and then projected that forward, right? It could be based on population growth or whatnot. But the idea that we were always going back to kind of the prior, forecast actual to predict the future, especially right now, right? Things are continuing to evolve so quickly. And so how, and now with kind of a lot of these Gen AI solutions, it is pretty amazing what we're seeing in terms of, supply chain and forecasting. How do you think about these kind of tech first approaches versus, Excel first approaches? How is that kind of changing the game and also just like closing the gap?
Yeah, so that's sort of always been our vision, or at least my vision here at Rhythm, has been to apply sort of the tech first approach to retail. And having come from, having a retail background, I knew very much that, retailers are not, in the tech world, we call it like A/B testing, right? Like throw it up, see which one performs better, and then go with that one. And, that's not how retailers approach it. They take a much more conservative approach and kind of want to figure everything out before anything is presented or put on the floor, as they say, or put online. And what we've been trying to help facilitate is this ability to test it, see how it does. And then from there, once you know how well it performs, then you can allocate the SKU to the perfect model to optimize for profitability. We've also built our platform flexibly enough because our vision is that it's not going to be just these two models that we see today. It's not going to be just dropship or marketplace, that there's going to be these hybrid versions of these two and even in combinations of the two that, we haven't yet seen. We've seen a couple of retailers, our most sophisticated ones, adopt more of a hybrid approach at the SKU level. And then they'll designate either at the SKU level or at the supplier level, they'll designate which model or which cohort of a model a supplier or SKU falls into. I really think that has to, because everyone's so squeezed for margins right now, that sort of has to be the future if they're going to continue to optimize for profitability, which both brands and retailers have to do right now.
Yeah, and I think that, right, like I've always thought about, let's not overcomplicate it because retail is complicated enough. And so if you start to think about, right, some of your greatest sources of, margin degradation, returns is always at the top of the list. I looked through the data from the report, and we sort of think about marketplaces, right? 83% of people cited, right, like kind of the complicated multiple sources of inventory, right, which that kind of is a marketplace. I mean, as we think about this, Sam, how do you think about the opportunity to improve profitability via a marketplace, but some of the challenges that presents from a returns perspective?
I guess it depends on kind of how you want to optimize for returns, because, I think some of the partners that we work with are wanting to optimize marketplace returns in that they want to use it as a way to drive traffic to stores. So they still are taking marketplace returns in stores. But it is a really interesting question in that, it is something that could remove that from that model. But I do think like we do often see a lot of people trying to work that more into an experience of kind of like a omni-channel piece where they have kind of any returns that they do have coming through, they want to own that part of the experience from a private retail marketplace perspective. And they want to kind of work it into an omni-channel piece where maybe they give the customer an opportunity to bring it into a store. And they want to give the opportunity for a customer to come into the store and potentially buy something else.
That's like a lot to kind of digest. I mean,
yeah.
There's a lot there. I mean, as we kind of wrap up because time has flown, and to me, we're almost at the end of June, so we're kind of at that halfway point. I think we're actually seeing, interestingly, going back to kind of pattern recognition. Last year, everybody was very focused on the top line the first half of the year, kind of what we've seen this year. I think going in the back half of the year, we're going to see a lot more around operations. Sam, as we think about Rhythm and some of these companies kind of just getting started, like, because there's so much that one could do, where do they get started? And how does the journey often change kind of like while they're on the path?
Within a year cycle, you mean, or just in general?
I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
both.
funny.
It's interesting to think about it.
Yeah. It is funny you say that because it is almost cyclical. My team does do kind of, it is almost cyclical, and my team does do a ton of work kind of in the beginning of the year, as you might imagine. It is very focused on kind of growth. It's a lot of kind of supplier and selection growth. It's a lot of category growth. Clearly, as we get kind of towards the end of the year, it tends to focus more towards any kind of cleanup that we might need to do. We tend to focus a little bit less on net new supplier selection. We tend to focus a little bit more on SKU growth within existing suppliers. And that tends to be kind of like our annual cycle, if you will, because our team does focus on both with our retail partners. We focus a lot on net new supplier growth, but we also focus within kind of the suppliers that you do work with. What is your SKU opportunity, which I often find to be the lowest hanging and kind of like lowest hanging fruit, and sometimes the biggest opportunity that you have. So that tends to be kind of like our annual cycle, and it's pretty predictable, I would say. But I do think what has been interesting kind of this year is, there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. I'm sure we're all aware of that. And, I think my team was a little bit anxious about, with the looming tariffs, what would that mean? Are people going to be, not wanting to grow as much? Are people going to be, feeling a little bit fearful? During the pandemic, we saw a range of kind of explosive times of e-commerce sales, but also before that, there was a little bit of kind of like paralysis of, anyone who had a brick heavy business was in a kind of a really terrifying time. And so we were like, is it going to be a little bit like that? What is it going to be like? What's been really interesting is we've worked with a lot more retailers actually than we have in the last couple of months, because I think there's been an appetite to kind of grow into categories that maybe people haven't been working in. Are there kind of less tariffed categories that maybe there's margin opportunity in? There's actually been a lot more appetite than we maybe anticipated because of that. There's just, there's a lot more interest in exploring net new opportunities that might save a little bit of margin and save them a little bit from kind of this tariff fate that is looming over everybody. So this year particularly has been pretty interesting. And, I think how it's going to play out is a little bit of everybody's guess, but time will tell. But we're really excited to work with, all of our retail partners, and everyone who comes in is a new puzzle, and we're thrilled.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that. So as I'm sitting here in Asia right now, and I've been here for almost 2 weeks, there's been a surprising conversation around marketplaces in almost kind of every meeting that I've been in, much more so than I would have expected. But this idea that you as a brand or a retailer can learn from the marketplace and then kind of take that back almost into kind of your DNA. It's like I said, it's a newish theme that I'm seeing, and really this kind of idea also too, you're not like mono marketplace, right? You're working with multiple partners because you want to be kind of this living, growing, breathing kind of organism. And so I think that things are definitely evolving, but I do think it's really interesting, this kind of like first half growth, top line, second half, right? Kind of, pulling the expenses and bottom line. And I think when you think about, kind of a marketplace strategy and, drop shipping and a lot of the other topics, of product assortment, retail media that we've talked about, right? They really kind of do sit inside the house, right? Kind of first floor, second floor, basement. And so, Ellie, if you can take us home here, what's your prediction for the rest of 2025, and how does that kind of relate to what you believed at the beginning of the year?
So I think there's going to be, like Sam said, it's cyclical. So I think on the second half of the year, retailers, everyone knows busy season. And so one of the reasons it does shift is because they're anticipating sales to go up. So now they're focused on, okay, how can we minimize costs? And in the 3P world, or online world, it all comes down to shipping costs. So how do we reduce shipping costs? And we launched a product in late 2022 to help retailers with managing shipping costs. It's called Shipping Optimization. And we've seen great results with that. The problem is that they usually come to us in the third quarter, and it's this mad rush to try and get these systems implemented and going before busy. So I think that we'll see that again. I'm fully expecting that we'll see. We're already seeing signs of it. So it was like the first 2 quarters, like, let's simulate, let's prove that this works and how much can you save us. And then the second half of the year is going to be all about how do we get as many of our partners using this and ensure that we're all set up for the busy season to save costs on shipping.
That's interesting. Shipping and payments, it goes back to, that's why it's good to be on the road, are 2 topics I hadn't heard much about in the first half, but as once again, as we're starting to go to the back half, those 2 topics are kind of coming to the front of the line much more so than I expected. So I can't believe our time has flown. All right, each of you, okay, lightning round. Sam, what do you think, for retailers and brands, if they're getting started today, what should they do with Rhythm now?
That's so, okay. You know what? I'm just going to have to say, call my team, because I feel like
It's nice. That's good. That's good.
I have to say it, right? Honestly, call my team, because I, as someone who, again, had worked at both retailers that I worked with, had worked with Rhythm, and I didn't know about my team. Call my team. Your buyers are busy. They have a lot going on. They're responsible for multiple channels. Growing 3P is a priority, but sometimes sometimes it falls to the wayside. Let us help you. We want to help you. Call my team.
I love it. Ellie, 60 seconds.
Yeah. Same question. All right. So if you're a retailer, don't delay. Launch your 3P. Launch your unified 3P program with us. We're the only platform to help you do both and optimize across both, as well as save on shipping costs. Probably won't happen this year, but next year we can get you all set up. And then if you're a brand, we are best suited to get you on as many channels and help you optimize on as many channels as you can. And we have a solution for you at every stage of your growth. So we will literally handhold you to help you go from whatever size you are now, ideally to one of our biggest brands. So that is our goal, is incentives are very aligned. So with both sets of customers. So when you come to Rhythm, your success is our success.
Okay. We're going to leave it there because that's so perfect. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to talking to you and catching up again soon. Take care.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. This is fun.
Thanks, Deborah. The report, Unlocking Success, The Pathway to Profitability for U.S. Brands and Retailers, is now available for free download. You can also access dozens more free industry reports and sign up for our free daily research summary on Coresight.com. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week.